Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 2023 Carbon Leadership Forum of Boston and Northeast Reuse Group meeting. Today, we'll host a presentation by Melissa Wenzel of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. This is our, I think, second month in a row, really taking a bit of a deep dive on some policies and really seeing kind of where the writing on the wall is and where very progressive states are going. So for our region, not only can we prepare as an industry, but really start to think about the intricacies of actually how do our jobs, how do kind of what we're doing, whether it's designer, builder, really make sure that we can change our practices and adapt to really decarbonize and create the circular economy we all want and need to get to. Laurel, anything before I hand it over?
Nope, sounds great.
There we go. So Melissa, please take it away.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I actually have several presentations that I'm kind of giving back to back, one day after another, and they're all just different enough, but of course they're all similar because they support our Minnesota sustainable built environment. And I have a lot to cover today, so we're going to jump right in. So I'm going to talk with you today about Minnesota's recent past. We do have a really strong dedication to sustainability around everything, including the built environment. But sometimes that doesn't mean that we get to make the changes we want based on elections. And so based on what has happened in the last, I'd say 9 months or so, I'll talk with you about the kind of policy developments that we've been focused on, as well as some non-legislative actions. And then I'll complete this presentation by talking about how we're having a very vibrant future in Minnesota and beyond. So for our recent past, a lot of folks might have seen this if you're already in our industry, but we know that we generate twice as much construction and demolition debris as we do household trash. And knowing that we're going to have a lot of those buildings gone, the existing building stock gone by 2030, by 2050, it's actually rather scary to think about where are we going to put those buildings and building materials. In Minnesota, I don't believe the numbers are all that different from this, but we don't have a lot of policy necessarily yet, no requirements necessarily, and very few incentives. So why not start to do those things? So yes, Minnesota is kind of considered progressive, especially compared to the surrounding states, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're accomplishing the goals that we've set forth. Well, you don't know what you don't know. So in 2019, we completed a study to assess what kind of materials are going to our construction and demolition land disposal facilities. And for those that can see this pie chart, you can see that there's a lot of materials here that have a potential, at least, of being able to be recycled, potentially reused. And obviously, once things get to a landfill, it's really hard to recover them. So policy change really needs to happen upstream. And in fact, we really need to focus on our hierarchy, which we actually have in our Minnesota statute, by the way, but that doesn't have any teeth to it. There's no, compliance and enforcement of you're not following the waste prevention section. We at least need to highlight this. We need to at least educate Minnesotans that we have this. And a lot of people in our world of sustainability know this, but how to implement it is very difficult. But there's hope. This particular slide I know is really, really busy, but you know what? That's by design, because this is our industry. This is our system of building material management. So it could be circular, where you have material sourcing, building the building, dismantling, sorting, and reusing building materials as much as you can before they're no longer reusable. Or you can make it, you can use it, and you can throw it away, linear. There are some challenges. I mean, we have a lot of transportation icons on here, so there could be a lot of movement. But if we're thinking local, if we use materials local or dismantle local or sell items local, yeah, there might be some transportation redundancy, but at least we're keeping things kind of at a short distance versus manufacturing things probably don't happen all in Minnesota. And some of our end of use, some of the landfilling goes on outside of Minnesota. So what can we have control of within our own state? A lot of people have heard this before. The greenest building is the one that already exists. So 4 years ago, I joined this particular program at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And the vacancy was created because we had a couple people who had a little portion of their time dedicated to a sustainable built environment. Those folks left. Our management decided to merge all the positions into one particular job position, and I stepped in for this opportunity. Technically, I'm supposed to also focus on new buildings, green building, LEED certification, that sort of thing. But we have a bunch of experts in that field here in Minnesota already. So I've been primarily focusing on reuse of buildings and building materials. So elections have consequences, right? Last year, we had a divided House and Senate, but there were hints of a surplus because we held on to a lot of money during the pandemic. We definitely thought we were going to have a deficit. So a lot of like tightening down, state government had some hiring freezes and some other financial freezes. And so, you know, I've been at the state for 20 years. And so I've seen these cycles of big deficits and some surpluses and break evens and go with the flow, do what you can without money, without additional funds. So like always, we are encouraged for our fiscal biennium to a year before or 9 months before, start to think about what sort of actions do we want to propose to the legislature the following year for possible movement. Even if it doesn't pass, the awareness level of that information to our elected officials actually is kind of a big deal, and it makes some changes over time. I've often been told that sometimes initiatives don't pass the first year, whether it's a grant request or fiscal opportunity within our legislative budgets, but at least you have to start somewhere. Doing nothing, you already know what's going to happen. If you do something, you might get somewhere. So fall of 2022, we had a very pleasant surprise happen after the elections in November 2022. We have a House and Senate and governor from the same political party that supports climate change. And we also found out that our surplus was a record surplus, which of course is controversial by itself, but that's not what you want to hear. Well, maybe you do, but it's not what I'm going to talk about. So we actually could not necessarily say the words climate change at our legislature before this year. Minnesota. So we were kind of in shock of how to pivot from a lot of tension, most years are like that, to everybody fighting over, I think it was $17 billion of surplus. I think we have a budget of like 50 some billion for comparison. And those of us that were starting to draft some policy for funding requests to support sustainability were pretty excited. Now, we never get overeager and think something's going to happen until it actually happens, but we felt like we might actually be able to move forward on several things. And sure enough, legislative session started earlier this year, back in January, I believe, and there was widespread support. And in some cases, it was bipartisan. So even though we had a slim majority of the same party in the House and Senate, there were efforts that supported a lot of initiatives from a lot of different political backgrounds. So that shows the dedication here in Minnesota for that. But that doesn't come easily. It still takes conversations and demonstration of what this funding could do. And a lot of work was done by our legislative staff to make the case for us. So the session ended just a month and a half ago, and we got the funding for the things we wanted. Maybe not 100%, but you know, like 90%. So overall, our entire agency is going to increase by 100 new positions based on the funding that we got. Most of them have tails, which means that they're funded beyond just the 2-year biennium. And after the hiring freezes we had for a couple of years during the beginning of the pandemic, we got permission to fill 80 vacancies. So 180 new positions, at least for 2 years, most of them longer than that. We have an agency of about 900. So now it'll be 1,080, roughly speaking. I haven't actually looked at the numbers lately. It's been adjusting quite a bit. But that's a lot of change for our agency, and I cannot wait. I'm excited. So what policy developments have we been working on? This is a statewide initiative. So there's more entities connected to climate action than obviously just the Pollution Control Agency. There's other agencies, there's nonprofits, there's for-profits. And this was a multi-year, multi-organization effort for us to finally have a climate action framework. And for us in the built environment, I was asked throughout the process, short periods of time, but throughout the entire process of developing this framework, what would I like to add related to the built environment? And first, let's kind of back up as to what it is. You know, it's a vision. It's a document that gives us an opportunity to reflect the values and also to have conversations with people to kind of figure out where we can meet them where they're at, where we can figure out who the players are and empower them, give them tools to be successful. So collectively, we're all doing better. And a lot of it has to do with accountability, believe it or not, that we have this document. It's codified in this document. It's not a legal document, but it's one that actually holds our values, holds our beliefs and our goals and what we want to see for our future. And that's pretty powerful by itself. Plus, it means that we get to work together, which, you know, if you're just talking state government, we've been rightfully called out for that we don't do a really good job of that. And so this particular framework does actually require us to work together. I think I hadn't read the final document for a couple months because, again, there's other things that I'm working on. And the actual things that I wanted to have in this document were almost word for word what I wrote down. And some of these things were also bullets that I submitted to request funding from the legislative budget, our governor's budget. And it's just amazing that sometimes just speaking up is enough to get the ball rolling. So within our climate action framework, these bullets are literally written word for word. I might have condensed a couple words just to make it fit on a slide, but about promoting adaptive reuse of existing buildings, about expanding deconstruction and reuse of materials, expanding recycling, focusing on market developments, looking at the life cycle of materials, providing financial support and technical assistance to accomplish all these things, expand the use of material conservation waste management plans. This is the first time in Minnesota that there's a formal document that has these words on it. So there's the really brief link to where you can learn more about it, not only about the building material management side of things, but also the entire framework. There is a heavy emphasis on environmental justice in it as well, which is also just as important as the actual goals we're trying to accomplish. So at the same time, you know, here we are, you know, emboldened by the positivity that happened during the legislative session that resulted from the elections. And there's a bunch of things we're working on simultaneously. We thought it might be a good idea. I mean, we know what we're doing, but some of these things happen fairly organically when people outside of the state of Minnesota suggest something and they're willing to help us create it. So sometimes we'll put something on hold and pick it up when there's interest and put it back on the shelf for a little while. We drafted a deconstruction request for proposal template. And I kid you not, the day after we had finished our draft for this document, I got a call from a county staff asking, by chance, do you have a deconstruction RFP template that I can use for an upcoming project? After I picked myself up from the floor, because I fell off my chair, no, I didn't, but it was just really great to see that. And that particular project actually went out for the request for proposal in May. So we actually have it, we were able to watch it live. And we adjusted our template, of course, to reflect that county's actual RFP. At about the same time, I was mentoring college students working on their capstone, their senior project in sustainable systems management. And this is my second year doing so. And the question that I posed to these students that were working with me, let's consider an on-campus building. And it's old, it needs to be renovated. So should we be demolishing it and building a new building that's state of the art, or should we renovate it for state of the art? I do have access to chat. I'm trying not to look at it, but I happened to see that one comment of people wanting to have a copy of that RFP template. There's going to be a little bit of an announcement later this afternoon or in this session about some of the tools that are being created. It's the second to the last bullet on this slide. So that is something that I really care about, is making sure that people have access to the tools that are already created, especially when we in Minnesota create them. I do not want anyone to reinvent the wheel. Somebody could reinvent a new phrase, so I don't have to use the wheel analogy. Continuing on, we did submit public comment, a lot of them from a lot of organizations, to EPA when they had a public comment period about greenhouse gas emissions and construction materials. And there was a high encouragement to focus on reuse as the #1 or top tool for those efforts. And we complied. We submitted 8 pages of comments that reflected several organizations here in Minnesota. We know that outreach is extremely important, as the reason why I'm here with you all today. So we actually have a program here in Minnesota called Green Steps Cities. And these are entities that choose to go above and beyond standard requirements set forth for them to be sustainable as well. And we have a formal program for that. And earlier this year, I gave a presentation on buildings that are adaptively reused. And another tool we didn't create, okay, we helped create, is this deconstruction toolkit. So for folks that are government entities or businesses or residents, anybody who's connected potentially to deconstruction, whether it's the actual action or deciding if a building's worth deconstructing, or whether or not you want to use materials in a remodel that came from buildings that were deconstructed, we had a partner organization create a toolkit to kind of lay that out. So we've inspired other people to consider building tools that are now live. And I was just referring to the Build Reuse Wiki. So about a week and a half ago, there was a workshop to highlight the fact that we know that there are these resources out there, but it's who you know or who spoke at which event for when you find out about these things. And I don't like that. I want people to have access to it so that they can use these tools and make it their own and not have to hunt for it and things like that. So it's at the very, very early stages. People who are part of Build Reuse, a member of Build Reuse, can edit anything or add documents. It is a view only for the general public. And then finally, this summer, we're working with an intern here at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to create a template for deconstruction ordinances. And we're going to have like a 3-tiered system of like getting started, normalizing, and deep green, ready to really charge forward and make a huge difference. So work in progress. It's still at the early stages. So I've never asked for funding. I'm in the photo here. I'm wearing green in the front. So this is a deconstruction project in West Metro, Minnesota. And I asked for $3 million and I got $2 million. And I almost only asked for 500,000 and was thinking that might be too much. And my colleagues were like, what are you doing? And that's where I'm like, okay, I'll ask for less. They're like, no, ask for as much as you think you can get, because you know that we can spend it. We know that there's a lot of people who want to do things and don't have money for them. So I asked for 3 million for 2 years and I got 2 million. And I'm just starting to work on figuring out kind of how that process is going to look for grants for businesses, nonprofits, local government, and just know that we'll probably have well more than 2 million in requests for that funding. Other parts of our division within our agency has requested also and have received environmental assistance grants. And kind of talking back and forth about, do we exclude or subtly include the built environment. And I think that's where it's at. So we hadn't ever had anything like building material management grants to the tune of $2 million. The most we've had is like 120,000. And that was environmental assistance with a little theme of built environment. And so we don't want to duplicate too much, though everybody's well aware at my division that we have a deficit of resources dedicated to the built environment. Think about household trash and recycling. I don't know about Massachusetts. I imagine it's very similar to Minnesota, where there's certain laws on the landfills, on the tipping fees, on taxes, on mandates for recycling, at least to a certain percentage. And all of these things are built into municipal household waste. That doesn't exist for the built environment. So we are starting somewhere, and we're starting pretty high with that $2 million amount of money. So this morning I was putting together a list. I actually went to a website that tracks the bills that I was following. It's been so busy since the end of the legislative session that I'm not entirely sure if all of these passed. I'm pretty sure they did. There's one or two that I think I might have to go back and take a look. But in terms of policy, it took people almost a year ago starting to draft these particular legislative documents with funding requests. And most of these have nothing to do with our agency, but we're not coming from the Pollution Control Agency, the Environmental Agency for Minnesota. So the first one was proposed by a very sustainable-minded elected official, state elected official for his city. And I've actually had a chance to go to the library, and I'm thrilled to know that that one did get funding to figure out how to reuse that building as a new library is being built. One that I'm very connected to is the job skills training for recently released inmates. So the photo that I showed in the last slide, the crew here is Better Futures Minnesota, one of the largest and longest standing deconstruction nonprofits in Minnesota. And they got more funding. In fact, getting it through the legislature means that they don't necessarily have to apply for grants, and it's easier to get funding to repeat versus having to go back and apply via a grant process. So really glad to see that that job skills training for recently released inmates actually passed. And we have a return to prison system rate of about 65% for the general public. It goes down to single digits because of the work Better Futures does to not only give people skills for living wages in the future, they pay them while they're training. They make sure that their housing, transportation, food, those sorts of needs are being met. Because if those needs are not being met, the success rate drops dramatically of going through a training program like that. We have a lot of building code that changed for new commercial buildings, for state government buildings, historic sites. We had a historic tax credit that sunsetted a couple of years ago to our dismay, collective community dismay. That got revived and reenacted. And I'm not so sure about the historic school building preservation grants appropriation, but this is to demonstrate just the richness of, from so many different organizations, the different bills that were proposed this legislative session, and most of them passed. I remember when I was watching the hearing for this particular bill, establishment of global warming impact standards required for construction materials used for state contracts primarily, they actually called it a unicorn bill. And I know the word unicorn and how it's normally used, but I've never heard people at the legislature testifying using that phrase. And these are elected officials saying this. So unicorn bill in this case means that legislators on both sides of the aisle support it, that people in the industry, the manufacturers approve it, and our environmental organizations approve it. And I believe this might be the only bill that can be said for. So we We do try to be thoughtful. There were definitely other bills that unrelated to sustainability that were really contentious and took several hours to talk through and probably didn't pass. So sometimes you have the right people for the right topic at the right time. Oh, I remember this bill. They say that in state government, the technical staff, which is me and others, lots of me and others across the state, are the experts. We're the ones that build the expertise and have the technical knowledge. And so building code does take technical knowledge and expertise. And there was a bill proposed that no building code could change basically or be added without legislative approval. And that's really hard when we see things that a non-technical person, potentially non-technical person, introduces a bill that would make other non-technical people adopt something or approve something that they may not have a lot of knowledge on. Anyway, so this is other things demonstrates that we do have a bit of pushback back and forth, but I'm pretty sure this one did not pass. Okay, well, I love e-bikes. Anybody who knows me fairly well knows that I love biking in general, and I love to talk about e-bikes, but I know that's not why you're here. But we did pass funding for electric assist bicycles, and I've had one since 2008, so of course I'm not going to be applying, but it just shows that sometimes the electrification side of things can really ramp up really quickly and involve a lot of entities. And 40% of the funding must go to low-income folks, and then also that the more you make, the less you would get back. So this is meant to incentivize those that have the least means to buy an e-bike. So either way, though, I think this is great. We're following other cities and states that ran out within hours or days, and there's already people saying that we hope to be able to propose this and get more funding in future years. All right, so what's next? I am seeing, even without us starting this grant project or program that we just got funding for, it just kicked in July 1st, so it's not much time since that passed. We're definitely seeing that there are municipalities telling us, we would love funding, but we already started to build our reuse buildings so that we can have a reuse program at our municipality. So household hazardous waste was the trend. People would build a room or a shed for that. Well, now entire buildings are being built, so building materials and household goods can go back into the public's domain. I know that counties are considering deconstruction grants because that's actually one of the reasons why I proposed the funding in the first place, is because counties would say, oh, we would love to have a deconstruction grant program. We don't have the funds for it. We have 3 counties right now representing a good chunk of our metropolitan area, so a good chunk of our population, but we have 87 counties and only 3 of them are offering deconstruction grants. We don't have any requirements, so we've been told that we're some of the first in the nation to actually have a grant program without a requirement, and we want to continue that. We know that the incentivizing an action can help make momentum happen faster than requiring things, especially if we're not sure we're ready for that, the market side of things, for example. With that funding, we would like to dedicate some of our dollars to making sure people are trained in deconstruction. We have much more demand than we have people who can deconstruct. So we need to fix that. And to make sure that we have a level playing field, we're going to follow probably closely to what City of Portland did, thanks to my interview with Sean Wood before he left the City of Portland, to do the exact same thing for EPA. We would like to create a certification program, and we already have an organization that is willing to do that. And every single day, I come across another building that's been adaptively reused. So this particular photo represents a really old, awkwardly shaped on this kind of sliver of a property, a bank that is now housing. And this is a small town in first-ring suburbs of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but for me, the city is like 20,000 people. If this city can do it, a lot of other cities can. Think about all the banks and all of the schools, elementary mostly, but in smaller towns, K-12, imagine all of those buildings that are either already vacant, will become vacant soon, and how much we need housing. It seems like just a perfect match for the work we're doing. So it was just taken a couple days ago, and others have seen this information or this quote. I did modify it just slightly, but I reminded somebody that I met in person 4 years ago that I had a pint with a couple of days ago when she was here in Minnesota, Jessica Marshall from the Green Mission Inc., that we didn't just start doing this stuff. And in fact, there wasn't much of a organized presence of this work before 2018. That's when we really started to invigorate this topic. I joined in 2019 and led a stakeholder group working with parts of our built environment system. But none of this happened by accident. And this took time, this took people, this took connections, this took resources, this continues to take all of those things, continuing on in the future to be able to demonstrate that these are our values, that we want to have a more sustainable, more vibrant, resilient and thriving built environment so that we can provide good quality jobs, high quality building materials at lower costs, housing and adaptive reuse of buildings, because we have a lot of new needs for new things thanks to the pandemic and post-pandemic, but we also have a lot of vacant buildings. And it's not an easy connection to make, but we can start by trying to incentivize or at least encourage those connections. People are already making them on their own. They're seeing the benefits here, but sometimes it does take a little bit of a nudge and a connection and a good job, way to go. So I am very proud of the work that Minnesota has done, not me, but Minnesota, because we have so many partners within this. And I'm happy to be the person that connects a lot of those people together. But it takes a statewide village for us to accomplish what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Melissa. An amazing presentation, and I think really highlighting a lot of the collaboration and how kind of all stakeholders are very much a part of this. For everyone in the audience, if you have a question, we can start the QA now. Please feel free to use the little raise hand. I will start with a question though. In looking to develop a lot of these policies, or at least kind of on the back end, was technical expertise from the industry brought in? Were there any stakeholder engagement sessions, and kind of how impactful, if they were having those, how impactful were they are to actually kind of dictate the language and the execution of these policies?
That's a really good question. So yes, we did actually start the session. I call it a session. I shouldn't do that. I started my work in 2019 with an already made stakeholder group built. So before I was hired into the position, my colleagues and our supervisor and my manager had already realized that having a stakeholder group was necessary. And so we had meetings every 6 weeks for a solid year with people that had definite voices and opinions and thoughts on how we should move forward. We were also having a stakeholder group dedicated to rulemaking for land disposal facilities. We have some of our solid waste landfills, construction demolition landfills that are unlined, and we have known for a while that we can't have that, and incentivized ways to get that to change. And now it's at the point of rulemaking. So both groups kicked off their stakeholder groups in fall of 2019, and we concluded in 2020. The rule advisory side of things is still up and down for activity, still continuing on. And we actually had a meeting earlier this week to discuss potential next steps for rulemaking. So yeah, bringing in people is absolutely necessary for success.
If anyone else, please feel free. If you have it in the chat, you can ask there as well. But the floor is open for any questions to be asked. If not, I can keep going, but One question I would ask, and then we can get to Abby. When looking at kind of construction and demolition waste and the impact it has, is there any consideration either in policies right now or going forward to set either diversion limits or really kind of start to use data to really reinforce the processes that are going to have to be most impacted?
I think it definitely will. So Jennifer Bang, the intern working with me this summer, first time having an intern within our programs, is actually doing a very good job of assessing what are some of the diversion requirements going on from other deconstruction ordinances that exist around the nation, around Canada even too. We want to work up to something that is statewide. But for now, we're working on something that local governments, whether it's a tribal nation, a city or county, or even an organization that might have a lot of buildings, they may want to consider what sort of diversion rate they want. Could it be just their own government buildings, or everybody that receives green funding, or everyone, every building? So we're researching what some of the other, particularly California, of course, and other cities, Portland, et cetera, and see what they're doing. And because we're not ready to have a statewide standard yet, we would like to introduce this topic and see then what people choose to do, what those local governments and tribal entities choose to implement. And I do see a couple questions in chat, if I can answer those before verbal questions come up. Abby, can you let me know if you're thinking about the deconstruction request for proposal template or the ordinance template?
Okay, I think that was my question that I believe you answered in your presentation, that the deconstruction RFP template, I think you mentioned. So thank you so much. If you can.
Well, I can upload that. I was going to say the deconstruction ordinance template is still very much far away from being ready, but I can actually probably upload the RFP template. So if I can...
I'm sure you can, Michael can send it out to us later as well.
Okay.
Sure, we'll look at that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And my other question was if you thought about the grant funds when people go to apply to those, would that be like project specific, so the contractor could use that for, offsetting costs of deconstruction? Because that is really the biggest challenge we're facing here when trying to sell the idea of deconstruction is the cost. Inevitably, we have seen that it is expensive.
Absolutely. So there are so many competing interests for that funding, and there's going to be a point in time that I won't be able to talk about it, but I'm still at that general stage, and I'm not saying anything that was not included in the governor's budget. But we did make a pitch so that we could offer grants for deconstruction. So could we give, in theory, $100,000 to a county that doesn't have funding for deconstruction grants, and then therefore they could give grants, roughly $10,000 is what I think our counties offer right now, $5,000 to $10,000. And so then the county itself would, yes, provide financial reasons to deconstruct. One thing I really like about Hennepin County, which is where Minneapolis is, and it's our largest county in the state, is they offer 3 different types of opportunities. One is to, offset the cost of deconstructing structures. One of them is to provide funding for moving structures, which of course is very uncommon, but also expensive and very meaningful when you can divert an entire house from the landfill. And then also for using used building materials in, say, a remodel or a new build or, whatever. And so I love the idea that there is this sort of 3-tiered process to be able to utilize those funds. And that also demonstrates that balance of the market, supply and availability of materials. So we'll see. It's a group effort. It's not something I make simultaneously or by myself solely. And so part of it is having a discussion with our management and be able to recognize that there are a lot of competing needs, including the training, that workforce development side. That's just as important. If you don't have people who can deconstruct, everything is kind of sunk.
when kind of piggybacking off of that, when looking at the need to either create the new workforce that is looking towards deconstruction, or really transitioning the very traditional demo subcontractors and trades to deconstruction, is that a process that can almost be built into statewide climate action plans? Or we've seen last year this group put out the roadmap for kind of the region, and what was found was that while there are a considerable amount of kind of demo subs and expertise in that, moving towards deconstruction, as was mentioned, is really thought of as this backbreaking, at least with expenses, very much time consuming. And what we try to look at was in some places that isn't really realized. If you look at a lot of the municipalities on the West Coast that have these more ingrained kind of ordinances or ecosystems, they're not seeing that. In the process for kind of helping Minnesota along, what is the approach or either has been or will be going forward to really make sure that that transition is not only easy, but something that a lot can do to really fill that niche?
A lot of what you say is future tense and a little bit out of my control, so I'm eager to actually see what happens too. But if you think about it, we're starting to promote this climate action framework. I gave a presentation, a 10-minute presentation to 2 of the regional EPA regions, and so just getting the word out about it to the masses started this spring. But if you think about it also, when the governor sees these budget requests come forward and sees how some of these are actually part of the climate action framework, it probably, I don't know for sure, but it probably made an easier case to say yes to that funding and give that a positive check. It is something that I can utilize within conversations of my management, not that they need to hear because they're well aware of this. They're the ones that supported me to have that funding request go through the governor. But it gives me something, it literally gives me a foundation, okay, figuratively, a foundation to build off of the goals that we're trying to accomplish. See, it's in this plan. This is a multi-agency, this is a statewide plan that every single part of Minnesota and every Minnesotan can be a part of. It says so. I don't have to do a lot of convincing, really, actually, but it does show a dedication towards the goals that we have within that framework. So it works very well to give us that level of support to be able to get the things that we're accomplishing right now. Same with EPA funding. If we get funding, it'll be an easier ask for us to have part of that fund go to this program.
Sure. If there's any other Q&A, please let us know. If not, Melissa, we can stand for just a little bit longer. I'll share my screen and show the Build Reuse Wiki if possible. We'll take the last question from Kathy, working at the Mass CEP. Have you had any success partnering with sister agencies in Minnesota, such as those who manage state buildings, to help adopt best practices?
Yeah, in fact, that particular topic itself was a little bit of a lightning rod this legislative session for good reason. So we actually have, when there are state bonded, state funded projects for buildings and building materials, they actually have to meet our own version of LEED certification. So MNB3, the website itself is mnb3.org. We have a program that says this is what you must do when you build new buildings. It kind of has a section dedicated for unbuilding as well, but not nearly as robust as just like LEED certification, green buildings. That program is run by our University of Minnesota. And Christian, these are some of the people that I might be connecting you with at the staff and faculty level soon. And they don't have enough staff and they don't have anybody for enforcement because it's a university, nor do they have like the formal power to do so, but they don't have enough resources to be able to actually continue to accomplish the goals set out in MNB3. And it's there's a partnership with the state of Minnesota administration department and the U of M to carry out these activities because we have a Center for Sustainable Building Research, and the staff there are the ones that work out the requirements and implementation for MNB3. They've been doing a shoestring budget, and so there was a report from the Office of Legislative Auditor to really highlight that we don't know who's supposed to be accomplishing these goals and not meeting them, and who is and who isn't, and what successes are being built from it. And so it was kind of a scathing report, but it reflected not badly on the University of Minnesota, but just on the fact that the program needed a bit more formality and at the statewide level. We can continue to use this University of Minnesota Center for Sustainable Building Research for the knowledge, expertise, and help with implementation. But as far as outreach on and oversight of this program, more bodies are needed, and more bodies should be placed at the state of Minnesota. So it's a really long-winded answer, and it's probably maybe not necessarily what you're expecting, but it was something that was front of mind because it was such a big deal. And it's good that these things get brought up. If there is a program that does support sustainable building materials in general, and the staff are not available, or there aren't any staff to administer that program, that will hinder success. So I'm glad that that got brought forward. I honestly don't remember what the next steps are. If there, I'm sure there are some, but so many things to keep my eyes open for. Good
Sure.
question.
Quickly in the last 10 minutes, so I'll send the link and share my screen right now. But looking at the Build Reuse Wiki, hopefully everyone can see this right now. But it had been mentioned last month, and it's a bit more fleshed out now. So the Build Reuse Wiki from Build Reuse has a lot of the resources that many of you have been either asking about or really looking into. I know a big part of a lot of the movement towards circularity is reducing the risk that I think a lot of us see. Hey, is the deconstruction effort going to be that much more expensive? Hey, are there any resources where I can take these materials, even if I'm doing something as simple as beginning at the soft strip? So looking through this, I sent the link in the chat, but there are not only case studies that look into different policies and strategies, looking at different projects of all sizes, guides as well, to not only generally what is deconstruction and reuse, but really some of them getting down to the nitty-gritty of the exact framework and implementation. So please, by all means, use this as a resource. Melissa, I know you gave a presentation a couple of days ago on this, but to keep it succinct, what do you think is the best use of this right now?
I would say for folks that have tools, getting them to us if you're not a member of Build Reuse is great. So you have me as a contact. So if you have tools that you want to add to it, great. Otherwise, I know that a lot of folks are at the point of wanting to implement something, or at least see what has been done around the nation. We include Canada in that conversation too. Take a look at these tools, see what we have. If you know of other ones, you can at least ping me and say, oh, hey, this one should be added. So you don't necessarily have to do more than just send me an email. So I can be your contact. There are folks that are also contacts closer to you. So Diane Cohen from Finger Lakes Reuse, I believe, is also a member. So check it out. If you have feedback, let us know. This is literally just launched 2 weeks ago, and that was a soft launch. The more people who use it, the more people who look at it, the more people who add to it, the better this will be for everybody.
Yeah, Melissa, I was excited to see that we were included on there when this launched.
Yes.
We have to update our listing though.
Yeah, a little bit.
I don't get any credit for that, by the way. I didn't even know that the building material management blend tool was added for Minnesota as well. So, I mean, that's how collaborative this organization is and the people within it. So.
Yeah, and really, just as Melissa had said, the more people that are, the more industry members, professionals adding to this, looking at this, the more effective it'll become. And hopefully this can be one of the many resource banks to refer to look for guidance. So we'll look to send this out in the meeting recap along with some of the different templates that were discussed. But feel free to start perusing this and browsing this. And if there are suggestions or additions, any little thing helps to really kind of make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, and we don't have to go through the time and the process, because as many of you all know from the past couple of days, it's been climate crisis, full steam ahead, and the built environment is really on the cusp of, we need to figure this out, and we need to be much better about embodied carbon, about emissions, about waste. So once again, please go ahead and use this. With that, oh, Kathy, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're trying to close. Sorry, I can have lots of questions, but I was just wondering about this. This is amazing, because I'm sorry, I missed that recent meeting about this wiki, and it's phenomenal. And I wonder about, do you anticipate it being used like in a complementary fashion with, say, any existing resources that you may have that are Minnesota specific, or for any other organization here? So it's a complementary as opposed to replacing. Trying to imagine like the local resources and where that information might live, or does that also go into this as well?
You know, it's hard to say. One of the benefits of having a wiki is that those that want to participate can. So honestly, we struggle to keep up to date with some of our content, our tools, our ordinances and templates and stuff like that. And it'll be easier for me to upload it to the wiki than it is to get it on our website, which tends to have more static content. If local government wants to, I'm going to encourage them. I might go ahead and list it, because it's one of those where, hey, it's public domain and doesn't hurt to have it listed in more places. Obviously, the more places you can list something, the more people can see it. The challenge, of course, is if things get updated and you don't have the root document or someone submitting an updated version. So that is, you know, always a problem, making sure everything is either evergreen or refreshed as necessary. But I'm a yes and person. I know you know that because you know me, Kathy, but
I think with that, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to thank Melissa. I think this has been kind of, at least in the past year, thinking about this, I think one of the most effective and I think content-filled presentations we've had. So thank you. It's really great to see not only what other regions are doing, but the best practices that we can glean from that. So thank you very, very much. The only other item I'll add, and I'll share my screen again. This was in the original invite, but last night there was a meetup and a summer social. So thank you if anyone here attended. I think a few people did, but it was great to see. Last year, I think there was about 10 people, and then at maximum last night, I counted about 45, 46. So there's very clearly a desire to grow and to really kind of collaborate, whether it is just off of kind of reuse aspects that this group focuses on, or generalized looking at the design impacts of embodied carbon, the many policies that are going throughout the nation right now. So thank you to all that have come, and we're looking to have another potential social as we get towards the hopefully cooler months, towards the end of the year, kind of post Greenbelt. So look forward to that. With that, I don't have anything else, and I know that Laurel said she had to take a call. So we want to thank everyone for showing up. As said earlier, there will be a recap going out with this. So please expect that early next week with the recording. And if there are any more kind of questions or anything needed from either us or Melissa, please feel free to reach out. We want to get you anything, whether it's specifications, templates, RFP language, what have you, because the easier this becomes, the more people who are doing it. I just Laurel, anything else in closing before we close up the meeting?
No, thank you. Thank you all for joining as always. And Melissa, amazing presentation. Always great to see what's happening there. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Thank you,
Great weekend, everybody.